And we're finally here. Spring training, though it is underway, real meaningful baseball is truly about to begin with the WBC on the verge of beginning. We have a lot to look at this week, including how ABS has impacted spring training. And we have to look at how WBC is playing out. And will we get a moment as good as Trout versus Ohtani this time around? You know what? We actually might. Now, obviously, I think the big news is going to be with the WBC and all that's coming up. I think for a lot of fans, we're really looking forward to it this time around. Basically, everybody that we would want to be participating is participating for the most part, with the exception of a couple of guys who are, in a lot of cases, hurt anyway, or would probably be pretty limited if they did go and participate. And we're getting to see how ABS is turning out in spring training right now, which has been pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, I've watched. I think I watched my first spring training game over the weekend because I listened to the first game that was played last week on the radio. It was really fun to hear baseball just on the radio. And in looking at it, there were some calls that were challenged in the game between the Mets and the Nationals. And in the first 3 innings, I think there were 3 different challenges, all of which were the player was upheld because the umpire missed the call by 2 times less than a half an inch, and the other time I think it was 0.7 inches.
Right, which tells you about the margin of error these poor umpires are working with here.
And we don't have the box, so that's another big difference.
Right, and I think watching it on TV without the box, you quickly get used to it.
Yeah,
you
will. Not a problem at all.
You will forget that the box is there within 10 games of this season.
I wonder, by the way, just in the WBC, because we don't have ABS, will they use the box in the WBC?
I'm sure the major leagues would prefer them not to, but I don't know if they won't.
But it is interesting, and we were talking with a guy who does that, a friend of mine, an online friend through Substack, who is the radio voice, I believe, for the Albuquerque Isotopes, Josh Suchan, and he was writing about something about how the umpires, when he watched it in AAA last year, they adapted pretty quickly. Okay, they got something called a ball that they thought was a strike, and so all of a sudden they started changing their strike zones.
Their ability to recalibrate based off of that is pretty
embarrassing, right? To a certain degree. And you're not, look, you try, as Ron Darling said in the telecast, you try looking at a 97-mile-an-hour fastball and calling it whether it was a quarter of an inch
and I thought,
in or out.
I thought that was something that was interesting that they talked about, that was higher velocity pitchers are less likely to be called strikes. The faster the pitch goes, the harder the umpire has to.
Because he's flinching.
Right. It's got less time to try and judge and react to the thing.
So, the challenge system is going to, certainly looks like it's work. It doesn't take too long. They do it in about, I'd say, 10 to 15 seconds. So that's not onerous or anything like that on it.
Right. You're never delaying the game for any kind of significant period of time.
And I see the pitchers aren't really being able to call because the pitcher always thinks it's a strike.
Right. I've noticed that they've immediately realized, okay, wait, we can't let the pitchers have their ability to challenge us because they'll just challenge it all of the time and just waste them.
And the catchers, I think, to lean that way too, because I saw a catcher call where he thought it was a strike and they called it a ball, and okay, well, the catcher blew the challenge there.
Right, yeah, there was a Mets catcher that called one and he wasn't close.
Yeah, it wasn't close. So I think I'm gonna watch it more during the end of spring training games, because it's interesting what's going to happen in spring training the next couple of weeks, because as you mentioned, so many teams. I think the Mets have 17 players.
Right.
Other teams have 15, like the Royals.
And you're talking about in a lot of cases the best players and guys that would be playing a significant amount of these later season spring training or later spring training games as they get ramped up and ready for the season. They're all going to the WBC, which means this year with a really new interesting rule that the major league clubs are going to get way more time to work developmentally with guys.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting watching the Mets broadcast today. We learned there's a new rule in spring training this year that allows a pitcher, he can start an inning, come out, and then come back in at the start of the next inning. So it's like, okay, you could have a pitcher have a terrible run, get him out of there to protect the number of pitches he has, and then bring him back in with a fresh sheet, which is like, okay, I think that makes sense in spring training when you're actually trying to get looks at guys.
Right, and you're trying to get guys their work in too, and you're right, you're getting a lot of guys who are going to get an extended look in the spring training where they wouldn't normally. I mean, normally your big time players, if they play in spring training games at all, they get 2 at bats and they get them out of the game after the second at bat for the most part. So now a lot of those guys are going to be playing in the WBC, so you're going to have the guy who's below him getting 2, maybe 3 at bats, maybe more in a game.
Right, and so don't be surprised, especially this spring training, training, if there's somebody that comes out of the spring training with a goofy stat line, that you're gonna be like, whoa, look at this guy. And you got to remember, they're playing a lot of the not regular major league guys are going to be there. You're really down a large number of players, especially pitchers. So you're not going to be facing the regular pitchers you're facing in spring training. You're going to be facing other guys that are working on stuff and trying to make rosters.
And I'm sitting here thinking, can I think of a player like who in spring training history who came out of spring training who was unheralded or not known at all, and then started hitting a spring training and never stopped for his whole career? I can't think of anybody that
it just doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. One, because a lot of times, as much as we talk about how pitchers are working on stuff in spring training, we saw Clay Holmes was working on stuff today. I saw Roki Sasaki is working on a brand new pitch. Batters are working on stuff too, and when we talk about batters on working on stuff, sometimes that means taking in a bat where you're not really trying to get a hit in the traditional way. You might be spending an entire bat working on trying to make sure to iron out guarding the outside of the plate and drive the ball to right field. And so you might not swing and be ready for a pitch on the inside part of the plate that you would turn on and swing in the regular season.
And I've seen a couple of I'm watching the Mets, only the Mets so far. I think it was Carson Benj and A.J. Ewing. What they did was they extended at bats by, fouling off some tough pitches, maybe, working the count deep in the count. And to your point, whether they got a hit or made the fact is that they battled.
The process was right.
Showing that they understand how to play the game.
And obviously, while we are crazy baseball fans, we are not such crazy baseball fans that we're going to watch spring training games of other teams.
No, definitely not. And there's no broadcast. It's hard to find these things.
Right, I'm just saying that would require a level of dedication that is almost inhuman.
So, and an ABS,
or you're being paid.
you mentioned that the harder pitches are difficult to call, and then some pitchers are basically are high ball pitchers who didn't get calls last year that may benefit from ABS because the pitch actually is a strike. It just traditionally didn't get called for. Luis Severino and Yamamoto throws high in the zone and doesn't always get the calls. Well, there's a bunch of pitchers
and then I think that also speaks to a lot of the things that umpires traditionally have done that are going to get challenged. Umpires have traditionally expanded the strike zone on 3-0, and now you're not going to get a lot of those expanded.
It's going to be just like any other pitch.
Right.
So that's a huge difference, right? So the umpires, because they're humans, right? It's 3-0 and all kind of guy throws a pitch. And if, basically they show the shape of the strike zone if the umpire mentally, is calling a 3-0 pitch versus if it's a 2-0 pitch. And they're not the same shape, right? Because the zone gets expanded on 3-0. Yeah, that's a strike, swing the bat, baby.
Right, because we'd all rather see him swing the bat, but the ABS doesn't care about
ABS
that.
is indifferent towards that. So that's going to be a real adjustment. And some pitchers are going to find out that, hey, that's a strike, right? Like if I throw it there, that's a tough place to hit the ball, and another pitch, the batter's going to go, that's a ball. Okay, well, I don't have to swing at that pitch. I've always
had to swing at that pitch.
Right. So it changes the mental gymnastics, and it's going to take a while for this to shake out. And I will say this again, because I keep saying it and nobody likes hearing it, I guess, is that I think ultimately we end up with ABS all the time.
It's coming.
I mean, the challenge system's cute and the umpires get to call the strikes and stuff but come on, if we can get it right every time, why not?
We? Right.
So, I think it's going to be very interesting to see after a month or two of ABS how the umpires have adjusted, and their scores went up, as Josh Tucson was saying on in his note, in AAA once they put ABS in. Isn't that interesting, right? So they got better, right? Which is because they understand what the parameters are, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. So, let's talk about the WBC. Now, World Baseball Classic begins on, I think,
March 5th, technically.
The 5th, right, because it's starting in Asia. So
Right. Pool. So we have 4 pools of 4 teams. We have 16 teams competing all across the world. We've got games going on from Puerto Rico to Texas to Japan and in Florida. So you've got 2 sites here in the U.S. and then you've got 2 international sites. Most of the groups, when you look at them, they're not going to be terribly exciting. The United States is in Group B. If we want to go through that group first, they're sharing Group B with Mexico, Italy, Great Britain, and Brazil. A group that should be a pretty neat and tidy affair for the U.S.
The U.S.-Mexico game is probably the one to circle on your calendar in the pool play. So you play everybody one time in your pool.
Right. And then, so that is Pool B. Pool A is Puerto Rico, Cuba, Canada, Panama, and Colombia. It's actually an interesting little pool. That could be a more exciting pool than you might possibly think.
Canada and Colombia and Jose Quintana, and I think Julio Teheran is pitching for Colombia, and then they both are the number 1 and 2 winningest pitchers in Colombian baseball history,
which is just really cool.
There you go. So and I think that they're basically the team to watch out in that one.
Right. Pool C, starting first over in Asia, is Japan, Australia, Korea, Czechia, and Chinese Taipei, which again, that sort of is a Japan and Korea should come out of that cleanly. But
they play each other, and so we know those two teams don't like each other, which is stupid.
Stupid, right?
That's what you say when you do that. And I guess there's a whole rivalry between Czechia and Japan in that they played each other in the WC, and Japan beat the heck out of him. But I guess Newtbar was struck out by this Czechia pitcher. A bunch of the Japanese players were dumb, and so they kind of have respect for Czechia. So they've been trying to help the Czechia program in Japan. So it's sort of like friendly, like trying to uplift kind of a thing.
Yeah. And then the final group in Pool D is Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, the Netherlands, Israel, and Nicaragua.
Right, and our own Mark Vientos here on the Mets is playing for Nicaragua, but I would be lying if I said I could name any other players on the Nicaraguan team.
Unfortunately, I think for those teams, they are going to fall to Venezuela and the Dominican Republic.
Yes, Venezuela has got a stacked team, and obviously so does the Dominican Republic, even without.
So those are our groups.
Lindor.
Obviously, the winner of each group will get out, and then the second place team gets out, and then they will meet in the playoff bracket. You play each of the other teams in your group once. And it's been pretty interesting so far. Japan has won the most World Baseball Classics, having won 3 of them, winning in 2006, beating Cuba, winning in 2009, beating South Korea, and then winning again last time we had this in 2023, where they beat the U.S.
How did that one end last time?
That one ended in great drama with Shohei Ohtani pitching to Mike Trout. That'd not quite be the same anticipated matchup this time around if we got it.
No, and they're not teammates. So I went and I took a little bit of a look to say, okay, so what would happen if within the pool if teams played and they played each other, and you have a couple of matches that could be interesting. I don't know that they actually play because the U.S. doesn't play Venezuela in pool play, but if they did, Bryce Harper then could face Jose Alvarado, his teammate in Philadelphia,
Jose Luzardo,
or his new teammate Jesus Luzardo.
Same with Kyle Schwarber.
Schwarber would do that. So, but they have to get through the pool play in order for that to happen. I guess the U.S. does play Italy in round 1, so Aaron Nola is going to pitch for Italy, and his teammate, obviously Bryce Harper or Schwarber, he could face them. So that could be a little bit
right. If the Dominican Republic advances, they could play the United States later on. We could get a battle of Paul Skeens versus O'Neal Cruz.
Yeah, and just I guess if your guy's facing another guy in your team, just what you really want as your fan of your team is nobody gets hurt.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Nolan McClain and Clay Holmes don't want to have any issues when they're facing Juan Soto or Mark Vientos. God forbid you hit the guy.
Right, something like that is what I was thinking. That would be horrible. And Seth Lugo, the Royals pitcher, who I was picking one player who sort of made his reputation or changed his reputation as a result of playing in the WBC. It would be Seth Lugo, who for Puerto Rico, I guess it was in 2017, was lights out in the World Baseball Classic in a way that surprised me, maybe him, and everybody. And it sort of changed his level of pitching and put
his trajectory. Yeah.
He became a guy who's had a pretty darn good career now. And Bobby Witt Jr. didn't play in the last WBC very much. I think he barely got an about, but he's going to play in this one.
And obviously, the big headlining news for the U.S. is we're going to have Tarek Skubal and Paul Skeens pitching for Team U.S. They are obviously limited because you actually have a pitch count depending on your round that you're in. You can only throw 65 pitches in a game in the first round, 80 in the quarterfinal, and then 95 in that final round, though I don't think any team is letting their pitcher get to 95.
And it was Skubal who came out and said he was only going to pitch one start in pool play, which is kind of weird to be on the team and saying, okay, I'm going to he gave his reasons after, and it has to do with development. I get all that kind of stuff, but you're on a team and all that. I think that's how they go. By the way, if we win and I help you, I'm done. So I think that's a little. In fact, I wanted to ask you this question. So we watch the Olympics and we watch the U.S. men's hockey team and the U.S. women's hockey team both win gold medals. Does that change the level of fan enthusiasm for the U.S. to win the WBC because we're kind of on a roll right now?
I don't think so in that, because it's not like there's some kind of extensive crossover fan population between hockey and baseball, where all of those fans that were just cheering for a patriotic victory in the Olympics are now going to turn around and cheer for one in the World Baseball Classic. I think obviously we would all like Team USA to win. We worry about their pitching depth once we get past pool play, especially if we don't get starts from a lot of their elite pitchers. But I also imagine every other team is going to be dealing with issues like this. You know, teams are not going to necessarily want their best players, and that's going to be an issue for Team Japan, is that last time around, Shohei was the only pitcher that was in the U.S. Now, their entire starting pitching rotation is in the U.S. Those guys aren't going to be able to throw innings as freely like they were able to last time.
And, if the U.S. gets, deep in the tournament and ends up playing Japan, which they seem to do, almost
quite
every
often.
WBC. Will Smith of the Dodgers, the catcher of the World Series champions and the hero of Game 7, is going to face another hero of Game 7 and Yamamoto of the Dodgers, and that would be interesting because he's his catcher.
Right, and it is interesting because when you're looking at this list, you immediately had to cross out almost about half the teams, because 13 out of the 30 teams don't have a player on Team USA, which is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah, and I guess I won't be necessarily following all the teams on the guys on the Mets that are playing for other countries, but at least on the U.S. team there's a few Mets.
I will be paying attention anytime I am watching a game or a highlight and I see one of them.
Right, and at least in the U.S., right, and Kelly Franco is going to Houston to cover the games. Actually, I think he's covering it for Great Britain, believe it or not, which is kind of cool. And these games will at least be played not in the middle of the night, as if you're going to try to watch the games in Asia.
Right. That is the nice thing, that at least for two of the pools, you're going to be able to watch them quite easily. I think the games are all on Netflix, correct?
Fox Sports, yes, FS1 and FS2. And you basically you look at the camaraderie that comes out of these games. These players have come to really love to play in this thing, and it's every 3 years, which is about the right cadence for this kind of an event. And I wonder if the WBC has sort of replaced, and Kelly made reference to this once, the All-Star game in its level of excitement that's a non-major league game. And the way the
I think it certainly replaced the prestige.
Yes.
In that, because the All-Star game used to be such a prestige thing, except because the game itself doesn't matter and the guys don't really try. They don't try in the same way. The guys try in this. These are
games matter.
The games matter. These are legit baseball games that they are trying to win. So that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, and you basically are, and I think you made this point in our last podcast, that these guys got to come out of the gate, and we watched Clay Holmes of the Mets today pitch 4 innings, something like 60 pitches or something like that, because he's trying to get stretched out, because he's on the U.S. team, and so he needs to be ready to hopefully go deeper in the games now, and these guys are going to have to come out like a house of fire and pitch hard in the WBC. What happens to them in August?
Right. We've seen this affect
early.
guys in the past, that this WBC ramp up does affect them. With hitters, it doesn't affect. They have a weird arc where they get tired earlier in the season, so they start off better, but then they fall off earlier, because then all of a sudden they get to August and the long season feels like it's been even longer because you essentially started playing a month earlier.
I don't know if you put this stat in here, but I like this. Of the 306 WBC players affiliated with major league teams, 190 are on 40-man rosters, which is interesting that there's that many that aren't.
Well, but I got to think about it for a lot of especially these smaller countries that are out there. Like, how many guys from Czechia and like these smaller, like Great Britain, how many of those guys are necessarily playing for a major league roster right now?
And you can, basically, if you're not going to be on the U.S. team and, your grandmother was, British,
right,
you have a chance to be on the British team.
And how many guys on Team Israel are playing in the major leagues right now? Probably 3.
Yeah, something like that. I think they may have played Major League Baseball, may not even be current players.
And same for even Korea and Team Japan. A lot of those guys on Team Australia, there's not going to be a ton of major leaguers on those rosters.
So another matchup I'd kind of like to see would be if the U.S. played Venezuela in the next round, is Ranger Suarez, and he is the newest Red Sox pitcher, pitching against Roman Anthony, and that could be because they had never been teammates before, really.
Right, so they face each other before they're actually playing together.
Exactly. So I think that's going to be interesting, and I'm looking for a big season from Roman Anthony this year. So are the Red Sox, obviously. Yeah, and I think the I remember the WC games. They go fast.
Right, they're not necessarily any shorter, I don't think.
No, but this feels like
They
go
feel like
fast.
they go by really quickly for
And the
whatever.
pitchers go in and out because, as you mentioned, they're limited in the pitches, and they got a lot of arms to throw out there. And there's some pretty, the U.S. team is loaded, but so is Venezuela, like we said, and Puerto Rico,
right.
and
For the most
Dominican
part,
Republic.
You've got your favorites to win each group, but then when you get past those, it's like, okay, who's going to win the whole thing? It's really tough to say because especially when you're only playing these one-game playoffs, you could just have a bad game and lose.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you get upset in pool play, it can be a tough climb up to get back.
Right, you could really, the U.S. loses the wrong game in pool play, it could have a large knock-on effect because all of a sudden that first matchup in the bracket stage is way harder than we would have liked it to be because there's a big difference between playing the first seed out of a lot of these groups and playing the second seed out of these
But
groups.
I want to say maybe I'll say it. It's unlikely to because here's how it could happen: is a pitcher goes out and dominates for 9 innings. Except that can't happen.
Right. You kind of need to have a game where the team you need that to happen.
Everything goes right. They slug the ball around.
Right, and you have to be stymied for 6 innings and give up a bunch of runs in those 6 innings. And even then, that requires the team to get because let's say the Mets, Team USA goes out and blows that first game against Mexico, and they lose. But then Mexico has to then not drop any of the other games because that could very easily happen to make that upset stand up. And that's the other hard part about it is sometimes even though these teams lose that one game, and it ends up not mattering in the end.
And I think you have to look at what happens score-wise, particularly after the 6th inning, because while the pitchers are good, there's a limited amount of sort of top quality relievers and closers and all that kind of stuff to go around.
And we see that sometimes where all of a sudden games just get out of control late, where teams will all of a sudden start pouring on runs because that one good pitcher they have comes out, and then it's a whole bunch of guys they're praying can get him out.
It's it's a hard thing to predict. If you had to pick who's going to get through and who will be in the final, because there's so many good teams.
I think the easiest is to pick Team Japan and Team the U.S. I think they're the best 2 teams that are out there right now in terms of just the overall collection of players they have.
I guess anything else would then kind of be an upset, right? If the Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic made it all the way down, DR has won.
Right, they won before. They certainly could win again.
So I think it's it's kind of interesting to see can they basically hold their seeding all the way through?
Right. That's going to be does Puerto Rico, does the U.S., does Japan, does the Dominican Republic, do they all hold those number 1 seeds the entire way?
And then after the WC comes, then it goes I think for 2 weeks altogether. The players basically come back for I don't even know if it's a week.
About 10 days.
Is it that much?
It's 10 days. The games in the U.S. start on the 6th, and then the final is on the 17th.
Okay, and opening day is like the
27th, about 10 days later.
Yeah. So basically, you come back, you get a game or 2 in with your team, maybe if you're coming back from that, and then
regular season is here. Let's go.
Baseball, March baseball.